So last month, we had a client achieve an amazing goal, which was completing the Mallorca 312 ride and running the London Marathon in 48 hours on the same weekend. And I want to just share this with you today. We're going to really dive into the client profile, so a bit about them. We're then going to look at that, the Mallorca 312 ride itself. I'll show you the ride, the data, and then I'll also show you their London Marathon, so you can really see the data, what their outputs were, but also just to prove that, this did actually happen, and that to anybody watching this, such an achievement, such a goal is possible. Even if you are a very time-crunched individual, you don't have much time to train, but with the right training strategy, the right training structure, nutrition and fueling, such results and goals really can be achieved. So let's get into it, really. We're going to start off with just going through the client profile. As I mentioned there, I'm just going to share my screen with you here, so just bear with me a moment. So this journey started at the beginning of November 2024. Just going to come into here. We'll just open this up. Just take you through the profile. So this journey started beginning of November 2024. This individual came to me. We had an initial consultation, and they laid out and said, these are my goals. This is what I want to achieve. And I was initially a little bit, should we say, just set back from it and said, okay, normally our clients are coming to us and they're obviously maybe just wanting to complete the Mallorca 312 as their own, just as a single event, and really target that and go and perform at their best at such an event, improve their power, lose weight, endurance, or anything to be able to actually go and do that. But as I say, this individual came to me and said, I'd like to do the Mallorca 312, but then actually coincidentally this year in 2025, the Mallorca 312 was on the Saturday, and the London Marathon was actually the next day on the Sunday. And they said, as a challenge, I want to be able to go and do this. I said, okay, it's going to really need some real fine tuning, a really specific training and nutrition and fueling strategy. But they sounded very committed, very motivated. So I said, why not? Let's get stuck in. Let's have a go. Let's do it. Client, as you can see here, let's just run through what their profile was. They were a 40-year-old male. They were in a senior professional role, so very time crunch. And as part of that, they had very limited training time with weekly international business travel. So they weren't just traveling around, the country that they were based in. They were actually on, global weekly international travel. So there was, throughout almost every other week or every week in some cases, they were, 3-4 days flying around on the road. And they were just some of the constraints that we had to deal with in terms of the equipment access that they had for training, the time that they had available to train, jet lag, changing of time zones. It's hard enough as it is, to prepare for such events if you have a very normal, clear schedule. But this is why I wanted to share this today, to show that it is possible. Their maximal available training time, as we can see here, they had 1 hour a day generally during the week. So that was normally first thing in the morning. That might have been at lunchtime in between meetings. Generally, we didn't do much later on in the day, as this particular individual liked to either get their training done, first thing in the morning or in between meetings at lunchtime, just get it done. And that really was only 60 minutes that they gave me to say, right, Ben, this is what I can give you. Work with that during the week, and let's really try to maximize that time. And that's what I had. That's what me and the team had to deal with. And we took that and really just put it to work. And then at the weekend, generally on a Saturday or Sunday, if they were at home, we also had 2 or 3 hours either on a Saturday or Sunday. It was either one of those days, because this individual as well, they did have a family with children, which we also took into account, and they didn't want to have the whole weekend take up training. So we only had those 2 or 3 hours. We had to put it either on a Saturday or Sunday to utilize that and take that into account. And stay with me on this, because I'm going to show you a bit of breakdown of certainly the ride structure, the training structure, and how we use this training time as well to be able to prepare this individual for these goals as well. Starting weight then, just in terms of where this client was starting and where they got to, just in terms of numbers going into the event, you can see here. So their starting weight was 102.8 kilos, and that was on the 11th of November 2024. By the time we got into April and we were ready to go and do the Mallorca 312, we brought the weight down to 91.3 kilos. And this individual had a starting FTP, functional threshold power, of 283 watts. Again, that was measured on week commencing the 11th of November 2024. And by the time they got on the plane to go and do the Mallorca 312, some testing in the weeks leading up to that, FTP was at 341 watts. So just so you've got a bit of an idea in terms of, the individual that has gone and achieved these goals, just wanted to share that with you there. So let's dive into some of the ride data now to begin with. So let me just share this with you here. So we can see here, Mallorca 312. Some of you who may even be watching this, it took place this year on Saturday, the 26th of April, 2025. They rolled out at 6:32 a.m. And we can see here that, the full route, this individual did do the full 312 event. You can see over there on the distance. So some key focuses and targets that we were really looking at here in terms of when we're just looking at the data that we can see here with their power, their heart rate, the analysis of the climbs. We identified that with the 312, if you've done it or you might be looking to do it, is that the bulk of the climbing on the 312 is generally done within the first half of the ride, should we say. So up until about the point that I've identified there into the ride. And this is where we really dived into that pacing and fueling strategy for the ride itself. I'm going to talk you through the training in a moment, but just the event itself, we really found that pacing strategy for the first half of the ride on those climbs is where we really identified the individuals, what I call the climbing safety zone. So we really found out really where that tempo zone is, ensuring that they weren't pushing too much over threshold. They were still working predominantly aerobic, because what we can see with a lot of clients when they're going into doing these types of events, certainly on these bigger climbs early on, they'll try and really push as hard as they can on those early climbs, be pushing well up above, their FTP, their threshold, and then really pay for it later on in the ride. Through that, you're also burning up your fuel utilization a lot quicker, your carbohydrates. So one of the first things that we really identified with this individual, certainly given they had a lot more constrained training time, as you can see, they weren't really able to go out and do, 5-6 hour weekly training rides for this. I think we even only had like 1 or 2 4-5 hour rides going into this. The rest was just done on 2-3 hour endurance rides at the weekend, but really just dialing in the fueling and the pacing to be able to go and do this. So big part of this was identifying that strategy. What I really emphasized with this individual as well was just using heart rate to be able to actually gauge that effort at the start. Of course, we were using a power meter. We were tracking the data with a power meter. We'd set up all of the training zones with a power meter as well. But what I really emphasized here, just because we weren't able to get that sheer amount of volume in at the start, is really just using heart rate. Again, that zone 3 tempo it's referred to. I refer to it as the climbing safety zone, really on the first part of the ride, just to ensure they were staying within that one just ensure that they weren't burning too much energy at the start or really causing too much fatigue, certainly from a neuromuscular level at the start of the ride, but just to ensure that we were also trying to stay as aerobically as we could in terms of energy output. We were saving carbohydrates and really then being able to conserve the energy for these climbs that came around the halfway point. But then as we can see here again towards the back end of the ride, the back half of the 312, it's not flat, but it's a lot flatter compared to that first half of the ride. So we identified that pacing strategy, and then we really just dialed in a fueling strategy to align with that as well. So we were looking at really achieving, with this individual, we'd really practiced a lot in terms of training. One, we identified fuel sources that worked for them in terms of, I call it the triple carb formula. So solids, fluid-based carbohydrates, and then gels and chews and things. From those 3 sources, we really worked closely with them to identify what worked best in terms of, a solid, a fluid, and gels for them. And then we were really trying to target 80 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour from the start of the ride to the finish of the end of the ride, and just made sure they had enough on board with them. We timed, we looked at the route here with the 312, looked at the feed stations, and just made sure we said, right, this is where we want to stop. And at that point, or to get to that point, this is what you need to take with you from what we'd actually been working on in training from the beginning of November through until the 26th of April to prepare them for that. And then, back end of the ride, it was really, this individual did have a few riders they were going over there with. So we emphasized really trying to obviously find a group for that back end of the ride as well, to really just share some of the load. And that really helped achieve this time that they did. You can see over there the time up the top here as well, what they achieved the time in. And the average power, normalized power for the event was 229 watts, as we can see over here. But really also it's the hydration strategy, because this individual in the past had also really suffered with cramp a lot. They'd done the 312 before. That was one of the big problems that they had when they came to me at the start, saying, I've tried to do this event before, but I've always, struggled with cramp. Even one year, it stopped them from completing the 312. They were only able to do the 225 Mallorca event. So we really dialed in around the hydration as well. We were ensuring that we were having enough fluid. We dialed in an electrolyte balance for them as well, making sure they're having enough sodium, magnesium, potassium, calcium, phosphorus within their bottles, within their hydration, to be able to actually ensure that they were able to complete this. I'll be completely honest with you, there was one point during the ride towards the back end where they did experience a bit of cramp for 5 minutes. So we did manage to, completely eliminate it. But compared to before, where it was actually almost preventing them going for this full distance, they felt so much better, and they were allowed what actually enabled them to really complete this event, get around the island, complete the full distance in this time here, which a fantastic achievement. The big thing then as well with the training and certainly from the pacing and fueling, as I said at the start of this video, a lot of clients come to us and individuals want to start working with us just to prepare for a day, just this actual, the 312 itself. But one thing that we really then had to be conscious of here from a pacing and fueling and energy expenditure standpoint was also that they're actually then going to run the London Marathon the next day. So they literally finished this ride, back to the airport, on the plane, flew back to London. And yeah, also we were just ensuring and emphasizing that, you know, we could not let them go underneath that carbohydrate intake per hour, become dehydrated, because that's not just going to affect it wasn't going to affect their performance on this ride. It was actually then ensuring their legs were going to be as fresh as possible for when they then actually turn up to the marathon start line the next morning. And then we'll just move over to that. So I'll share this here. You can see the tab. We're then on to Sunday, the 27th, 2025 at 9:40 a.m. They headed to the start line for the London Marathon, and you can see here ran a really nice, consistent marathon, just in terms of, again, we can see the outputs, we can see the heart rate, we can see the cadence and the data that was coming from the running. And again, we just really identified, you know, right, we're going to really have to use heart rate to be able to just pace this effort. We looked at the pace as well for the run, and what, you know, we've obviously been practicing a lot in training, different paces. I'm going to get onto the training in a moment for the ride and the run, so just bear with me on that. But just to show you the actual two events first, really identified that heart rate point in terms of where is that point, that we don't want to push it above that, again, in terms of accumulating too much fatigue too early, but then also really burning through the substrates, the fuel, to not be able to complete these back-to-back events. So you can see they got round here, they completed the full event, they did it in 4 hours and 19 minutes, which I think is an extraordinary achievement, given that they did the 312 in 11 hours the day before, and there was a flight in there, and obviously there was some fatigue, but it was also really key looking at, you know, the 312 during the ride, but post-ride, we had a strategy in place in terms of, you know, as soon as they finished that ride, we set them out the protein targets, we set them out the carbohydrate targets. I said, look, we've just got to hit this to be able to replenish muscle glycogen, ensure there was enough protein available within that period of them actually finishing the 312, so the muscle had enough protein available to really actually start that recovery process and repairing muscle tissue to be able to go and, yeah, pound the tarmac around London, obviously, yeah, the next day. So yeah, so in terms of the training strategy that we really used for this individual, just come off of here, back on. So in terms from a training standpoint, you might be thinking, what do we actually do with a training strategy to be able to really help this individual achieve this, for me, an amazing achievement, really. And when if we start with the bike to begin with, it was a very, very dialed in process. As I just showed you on the profile at the start there, this individual had an hour a week from Monday to Friday generally. And on those days, we were dealing with international business travel, where we were really trying to, you know, juggle things with that. So what we did from a training standpoint is the average weekly ride time was around 5 hours when we looked at it, what we were doing with them. Okay. So there was, during the week, we were looking at 2 to 3 hours on the bike on some weeks, and we did rotate the 4 weekly, you know, mesocycles with this, the 4 weekly training structure. We had some parts from November going through to April where we had a bit more of a bike focus, and then there were times where they were actually away for extended periods of business and they couldn't actually access a bike. So what we did in this period, if they were away for 10 days on international travel, because they couldn't actually access a bike or a good enough bike that was going to give us any real good data to allow to train, is we actually placed an emphasis and focus on that as a run block. So there were times where the load and the transfer between the run and the bike really did shift. But what we did with the bike specifically to begin with, as I say, we had 2 to 3 hours during the week, which was very focused, threshold intervals, VO2 max intervals, very dialed in around their FTP. We had a progressive overload to that, and that allowed us to actually really utilize that 60 minutes that they had available. And on some days they had access to bikes, you know, even when they were traveling, where they could track power with that as well. So we were able to stay consistent with that, really dialed in, looking at least once a week. They were doing a threshold type session. They were doing at least once a week. And this was the priority session, a VO2 max session, where we were doing things like really trying to just accumulate 16 to 20 minutes at VO2 max on the bike through the week, to ensure we really were just pushing up that efficiency and really utilizing that 60 minutes that was available. There was some specific threshold climbing work within there as well. Obviously, with the 312 having so much climbing in it, we've really built in some threshold and sort of tempo work closer to the event with that, to actually really target that system and allow them to help with that sort of sustained climbing, but train actually staying within that tempo zone and pace that as well, and then have the fueling strategy with that as well. From an endurance standpoint, then, as I showed you at the start as well, this individual only wanted to really do 2 to 3 hours at the weekend, and this was either on a Saturday or a Sunday. So when we were in a real focused bike block, we were placing more emphasis. That was basically a 3 hour, really focused sort of zone 2 ride, but not always completely zone 2. I like to have sort of a 70-30 split, certainly if we're doing some riding out on the road, where we were accumulating around sort of, 70% of the ride at zone 2 to really work on dialing in that and getting those zone 2 adaptations that we wanted, obviously, for the duration of the ride, but then certainly just improving that aerobic efficiency, given this being such a heavy 48 hours of obviously endurance work. So one of those rides that we were working through on the week was normally at the weekend, and it was 2 to 3 hours of really focused zone 2 work, but then maybe with 20 to 30% of that ride also being just adding a bit of climbing in there as well, working on being able to actually sustain and staying as aerobic as possible on those climbs as well, to be able to conserve energy, to be able to complete the 3-1-2, but like we were saying, then actually be able to go and run the marathon the next day. And any other riding around that, it was really adding in extra zone 2 work. We did add on some specific talk sessions, so some low cadence work. We did have a little bit of off bike training as well, just to work on efficiency, robustness with the amount of the interchange between the training, obviously with the run and the bike. It was really making sure that their body was robust enough in terms of just actually having some off bike, strength, flexibility, mobility, functional strength training to really help with that as well. And we just progressed that, through from November, starting with a very focused block, ramping up that FTP, because I'm a very strong believer in terms of if you are limited in training time, the winter should be used as an opportunity to really push up that FTP. And then when you're coming into January and February, it's actually training zone 2 at that new FTP. So 70% of that new FTP to really be able to then start becoming more aerobically efficient at that new FTP and being able to stay under it and work as efficient as possible, certainly on the long sustained climbs. The run then actually followed quite a similar structure to the bike. We obviously had to balance it and change it around a little bit to be able to complement the bike. But if we were in a sort of a heavier bike week, the run would probably take a little bit more of an aerobic focus. So it'd be a lot of aerobic runs, really just dialing in at that zone 2. We used a lot of heart rate on the run. We did dial in the pacing, obviously, to ensure we were tracking progression with the run as well. But if it was a heavier bike week or like a VO2 bike session, we'd then be using some aerobic runs and vice versa. If it was more of an aerobic bike session, we were then using VO2 max type run sort of speed intervals to really be able to train that run intensity with it as well. And just, really, as I say, fine tuning that structure to ensure that they were balancing, monitoring that fatigue with it as well, but also ensuring that we were seeing progression. And then just really adding some long runs in. So some of those opportunities where we did have, 2 to 3 hours to be able to actually then, on some weekends, we would actually maybe dedicate that to the run and say, right, certainly as we got closer to the marathon, really starting to just build up that run volume with it. Or if it was more in with like a run micro cycle that we had, we knew that the client was going to be away for that period that I mentioned of 10 days where they didn't really have access to a bike. We just really dialed in on the run there, some good VO2 max run type sessions, brought in some volume there, and just really built some good structured blocks around that as well. In terms of the nutrition, as you can see, the client lost, let me just double check in terms of the amount back on there. So they started at 102.8 kg and their start weight at the event was 91.3. So we're looking at around a 10, 11 kg weight loss. So what we did was just very fine tuned in terms of identifying where their BMR is. And then we really gave them a lot of guidance in terms of, again, if it was a 7-day period where they were just eating at home and had it obviously very laid out, same meals throughout the day, then it was a lot easier. But with this individual, as I say, they were flying around the world almost on a weekly basis. So we really helped them with identifying, going through airports, staying in hotels, what foods, how to time that with their training to ensure that when they were doing a run or a bike session, that they were going into that and had loads of energy available to really push and maximize the limited time that they had. The key focus here was every time that they were going into a training session, ensuring that they had loads of energy, that they could really hit their targets with it, but then at the same time managing their nutrition through the rest of the day. If they were then sitting in meetings for the day, on an aeroplane, back home at the weekends with the family, just coaching them on the foods that were really going to allow them to maximize their training, but then actually stay obviously within a calorie deficit, a safe and steady calorie deficit, to lose that 10, 11 kilos from beginning middle of November through to April, to be able to increase that power to weight ratio, but obviously pushing up that FTP by 50, 60 watts at the same time by just bringing in that structure and really dialing things in there as well. So by the way, if you wanted some help with this and you're thinking about actually going and taking on a challenge like yourself, or you are looking to lose a little bit of weight with it and push up your FTP and become more efficient on the bike, there'll be a link here somewhere, but probably below the video in the description. You can click on that, book in a call with me, and we'll just do a profile like I did with this client at the start, see if I can help, and then obviously we can go from there. But that is really what we did with the client, where they started from. You've seen the events there. You've seen, I've just explained to you how we've helped them with the training. You can take some of that. You can put it into your own training if you want. You can try some of those strategies that I've gone through with you on the call today. I hope you found that interesting, and I'll see you in the next video.